Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel Kanun Sarvopari, and this is going to be my most productive vlogs because I am following the method called Pomodoro technique while studying. So without wasting any time, let's delve into the world of law. So we are going to discuss about all the related case laws related to section 19 clause 1 subclause A of the Constitution of India. So first of all, Article 19 of the Indian Constitution gives certain freedoms to the citizens of India. For example, the freedom of speech and expression, to freedom to assemble without arms, the freedom to form unions, associations and cooperative societies, the freedom to travel anywhere in the country, the freedom to reside anywhere in the territory of India, and the freedom to carry on any business, any occupation or any trade. But these freedoms are subjected to several restrictions given under Article 19 Clause 2 to Article 19 Clause 6. Article 19 Clause 2 says that all the citizens shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression subjected to certain reasonable restrictions. For example, a person cannot speak anything in derogation of the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India with respect to security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, contempt of court, defamation or incitement to an offence. So the very first case law related to this Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A is Bijoy Emmanuel versus State of Kerala 1986 that I have already discussed in my previous videos. This case law was related to the fact that freedom of speech includes freedom of silence. This case is also known as National Anthem case. The second case related to this article is Brij Bhushan versus State of Delhi, that is from the year 1950, and this deals with pre-censorship of the newspapers. So basically, in this case, there was a magazine called The Organizers, and the government of East Punjab introduced an act called the East Punjab Public Safety Act 1949 and reinforced pre-censorship upon this magazine called The Organizers because it published certain facts and certain reviews about Pakistan at that time. As we all know, there were several tensions going on in the year 1950 between India and Pakistan. So this magazine was actually publishing several viewpoints and several facts related to that. So the issue in front of the Supreme Court here was whether this act called the East Punjab Public Safety Act 1949 is in derogation of Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A or it falls under the restrictions provided in Article 19 Clause 2. So the Supreme Court held that it was a breach of the fundamental right of speech and expression because freedom of speech and expression embodies the freedom of press as a fundamental right, and there should be no restriction on the spread of information, whether in the form of magazines, newspapers or any other form. The restrictions under Article 19 Clause 2 should be reasonable. The court held that even if a government wants to restrict the magazine, it needs to prove the reasonableness of the restrictions, but the government failed to prove it, and the Supreme Court held that there should be a direct threat and a clear threat to the public order or to the safety of the country. Only then the restrictions would seem valid. A similar case was Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras 1950. This case introduced doctrine of severability that said that if we remove a provision from a law and even after removing that provision, the essence of that law does not change, then that provision that we tend to remove earlier should be removed from that law. So basically in this case also, Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras 1950. In this case, there was a magazine called The Crossroads, and in this magazine, the publication of certain oppositions to the policies, to the foreign policies of the then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru were published. And since there were several tensions going on at that time in Madras, the government decided to restrict the publication and entry of this magazine into the state of Madras. This was basically challenged in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court again held that freedom of press is a fundamental right embodied under the Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A, and therefore there should be a reasonable restriction if a government wants to restrict the publication of a press. The Supreme Court did not find any evidence or any such strong provision to validate the restriction on the press. Therefore, freedom of press was therefore held to be a fundamental right which cannot be restricted in this case. So apart from the case laws, if we talk about this vlog, then this vlog is basically consisted of 4 sessions of 50 minutes each, and after each session I took 10 minutes break. Earlier when I used to study, I always used to underrate this method called Pomodoro technique. I used to think that I could just focus for 3 hours continuously and I don't need to take break after 50 minutes. But after actually applying it to my study schedule, I realized that this method actually works. Out of all the works I have done till now, I will say that my 100% productivity was due to this technique called Pomodoro, wherein you work for 50 minutes straight and take a 10 minutes break. Earlier, what used to happen was I used to give my 100% for 2 to 3 hours, and after that I used to take a long break of 2 hours. So that would not work for me. So I think I am ready to follow this method forever in my life, and I'll suggest you guys as well to follow this. And I have also uploaded this full 3.5 hours video on my YouTube channel, so you can watch that and you can study along with that video. An alarm ring would actually ring after every session of 50 minutes and in the start of every session as well. So let's come back to the case laws. So the next case law related to the freedom of press was Sakal Papers versus Union of India 1961. This case law was basically related to a fact that the government in 1961 passed a legislation that basically fixed the number of pages in a newspaper. For example, it fixed the price for a certain number of pages in newspaper. For example, if there is a publication house 1 and there is a publication house 2, they both need to sell their newspapers at the same price and at the same number of pages. If any newspaper wants to increase the number of pages in that newspaper, it needs to increase the selling price. So it was basically impacting the newspapers in a negative manner, because they were actually restricted from writing the content they used to write earlier. It was mainly because the number of pages in a newspaper were fixed, and even if a newspaper wants to increase the number of pages, it would have to charge more from the customers. Therefore, it would create a risk of losing customers, because everybody cannot afford that newspaper which they used to buy at such a lower price earlier. So newspapers would also lose the customers if it tends to increase the number of pages, and if it doesn't take the risk, then the quality of the content would be affected. The government argued that they basically introduced this act in order to protect the marginalized newspapers. However, the court in this case held that freedom of speech and expression includes freedom of press, and this act was basically restricting the freedom to have a considerable amount of content in the newspaper. Therefore, this act was considered in derogation of Article 13, Clause 1 of the Constitution, and also in derogation of Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A of the Indian Constitution. Therefore, it was held unconstitutional. So the next case law related to Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A is R. Rajgopal versus State of Tamil Nadu 1994. This case is also known as Auto Shankar case. So basically in this case, there was a criminal called Gauri Shankar, and this criminal actually was in prison, and while in the prison he wrote an autobiography, and in that autobiography he wrote all his connections to the politicians, to the public servants and everyone related to the government, who basically helped him in his criminal history. So that autobiography was delivered to his wife, and that was automatically delivered to a magazine, a Tamil magazine. And the government basically challenged this autobiography on the ground that it hinders the right to privacy of the criminal, and also it defames certain government officials. Therefore, they argued that pre-censorship should be imposed on this magazine before publication. So the court in this case held that in public domains where public life is affected, a right to privacy does not matter, because in this case the autobiography contains several records of criminal history, which is a interest of public. So in this case there need not to be any privacy that needs to be followed. The court meant that right to privacy does not relate to the public conduct of an individual, because public conduct is something that is in a general interest of the public. Secondly, the Supreme Court held that government or public officials cannot impose prior restraints on publication unless the material is proven to threaten public order, morality, or security. Basically, pre-publication censorship is unconstitutional, and the government cannot prohibit a publication, but it can take legal action only afterwards if it is proven that the contents in that publication were false. So these were the 4 case laws that I did related to the freedom of press in this article. Now if we talk about the commercial advertisements topic under the freedom of speech. Basically the question is whether commercial advertisements are a part of freedom of speech. So basically there are 2 case laws in this topic, which are Hamdard Davakhana versus Union of India and Tata Press versus MTNL. So in the first case law called Hamdard Davakhana versus Union of India 1960, the government basically passed an act which prohibited advertisements promoting medicines that claimed to cure certain diseases or disorders like infertility or sexual disorders, as they were considered misleading and harmful to public health. Hamdard Davakhana, that is basically the petitioner in this case, argued that this act violated their Article 19 Clause 1 Clause A, that is freedom to speech and expression, because they believed that commercial advertisements would come under this article, and Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause G that says right to practice any trade, business or occupation. However, the Supreme Court in this case held that Commercial advertisements are not a part of free speech, though this principle was later changed and modified in the subsequent cases. But in this case, the Supreme Court held that commercial advertisements are not free speech, and this act passed by the government basically aimed to protect public health by preventing misleading advertisements, and it would come under the restrictions, the reasonable restrictions that are necessary under Article 19, Clause 6. Basically, Article 19 Clause 1 Clause G says that any person in India can carry on any profession, trade or business or occupation. But Article 19 Clause 6 defines certain reasonable restrictions on this practice of trade and business to prevent public harm. So basically the court held that this act passed by the government prevents public harm by preventing misleading advertisements, and since these medical advertisements were harming the public health, the court upheld the validity of the act. So the court basically held in this case that absolute freedom to advertise products that may harm public health cannot be claimed by businesses, especially those making unverified claims about curing serious medical conditions. Now the next case is Tata Press versus MTNL 1995. This is basically the case where Justice Kuldeep Singh held that commercial advertisements are a part of freedom of speech and expression under Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A. And such advertisements can only be subjected to reasonable restrictions only if the advertisements are misleading or if they promote illegal products or violate public decency. So that was all for Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A that speaks freedom of speech and expression. Now you know what freedom of speech and expression means and how it is restricted over the years by different case laws. So that's it for this video. Make sure to subscribe my channel, and if you have subscribed my channel, then thank you for it, and make sure to like this video and share it as much as you can. So bye bye, take care, see you in the next vlog.